77 AD, Pliny the Elder, a Roman philosopher and military commander, published his work The History of Nature. This functioned kind of like an early version of the encyclopedia, and it described both everyday phenomena, like wind and the curvature of the globe, and really strange occurrences, like blood rain. When exploring why the Earth is round, Pliny tries to explain how the ocean curves as well, but what stood out to me is how he describes the ocean. He writes that the ocean is the utmost bound environing the whole globe. In other words, by Pliny's understanding, the ocean is what envelops and holds together our planet. Pliny may have lived about 2,000 years ago, but the idea of the ocean holding things together is still very much present. There are 3 works I'll be focusing on over the course of this video. All 3 are focused on indigenous concepts of the Pacific. The first of these is Our Sea of Islands, an essay by Tongan and Fijian writer and anthropologist Epeli Hau'ofa. The second is the poem Praise Song for Oceania by indigenous Chamorro writer, publisher, and professor Craig Santos Perez. And the third is the short story The Pluperfect Pawa by Carrie Holm, a New Zealand author. Epeli Hau'ofa is a Tongan and Fijian writer and anthropologist from Fiji. His essay, Our Sea of Islands, was originally published in the collection A New Oceania, Rediscovering Our Sea of Islands, in 1993. This piece is a counter-argument for those who think that the Pacific Islands are much too small, too poorly endowed with resources, and too isolated from the centers of economic growth for their inhabitants ever to be able to rise above their present condition of dependence on the largesse of wealthy nations. Hau'ofa challenges the reader to think of the Pacific Islands not as small areas of land sitting atop submerged reefs or seamounts, but as Oceania, something so vast that it would compel them, the wealthy nations, to a drastic review of their perspectives and policies. The term Pacific Islands is one that implies that the islands themselves are separate, and compared to the aforementioned wealthy nations, each is individually small. But by considering them Oceania instead, they become a whole body. The ocean is what provides the container for this geographical union. And the ocean isn't just a void on a map. While we usually ignore the water features and focus instead on demarcated regions, the ocean is just as physical and full of potential as land. It isn't just a cartographical feature, it's a space that allows for community because it doesn't just connect land, it connects the people who live there too. As Hau'ofa puts it, only when we focus on what ordinary people are actually doing rather than on what they should be doing, can we see the broader picture of reality. The islands expand further than even Oceania. Funds and goods are exchanged between the homes abroad people and the homeland relatives, an exchange that exists outside the capitalistic global market. This cycle of goods and gifts moving back and forth between the homes abroad and homeland relatives is what Hau'ofa describes as the social centrality of the ancient practice of reciprocity, the core of all oceanic cultures. The exchange isn't for profit, it's for the people involved. But the ocean isn't just a space of travel, it's an entire biome home to fauna and flora of all shapes, sizes, and colors. As Steve Mentz, a blue humanities professor at St. John's University, puts it in his essay Ocean from Anthropocene Unseen, the sea is not void, it's superabundance. Life lives where water moves. Oceanic space comprises roughly 90% of the total biospheric volume of our planet. How do we reconcile this superabundance with oneness? How can something so massive that it houses 90% of the total biospheric volume of our planet be just one body, one vessel? Christopher L. Connery, a professor at UCSC, thinks through the Pacific Rim in the face of Western capitalism in his essay The Oceanic Feeling and the Regional Imaginary, published in 1996 in the collection Global Local, Cultural Production and the Transnational Imaginary. Connery argues that the ocean has become capital's myth element and that the conquest of the world ocean is coterminous with the rise of Western capitalism. Connery views the ocean through a lens of this Western capitalism. Mentz, too, by reckoning with the ocean as superabundance, sees the ocean as what it can provide. His view of the ocean, too, is infused with the products of capitalism. In a section entitled Ocean is Anthropocene, Mentz writes, every drop contains plastic. Every drop contains chemical traces and medicinal fragments. All these drops together make up the biggest and the most important object on our planet, the ocean. The idea of the ocean as a space for capitalism and commerce has even made its way into pop culture. SHINee, the legendary Korean pop group, released a music video this year for their song Atlantis, wherein the mythical kingdom of Atlantis is reimagined as a convenience store. Atlantis doesn't seem to play into the great, sublime, infinite sea of capital that Connery describes. By setting the music video in the convenience store, the ocean becomes a familiar, everyday space. But it is also a reimagining of the mythological kingdom of Atlantis, which is often considered a hub of mysterious power, technological or magical. What does that mean for that power to be represented as commercial goods? The colorful consumerism of SHINee's Atlantis may be familiar, but it doesn't present the personal, relational exchange that Hawufa writes about. Hawufa's Our Sea of Islands is a response to the view of the ocean that only engages with it on a global, zoomed-out scale. The massiveness of the ocean is difficult to come to terms with, but it isn't just a global container. The ocean is a space of community, relationships, and interconnectedness in a way that isn't just for profit. The ocean unifies islands, physical spaces, but it also unifies people. The islands are not connected only with regions of the Pacific Rim, Hawufa writes. Within Oceania itself, people are once again circulating in increasing numbers and frequency.
Tasi, and Kai, and Tai, and Moana Nui, and Vasa, and Tahi, and Vaitui, and Wanso Wara all are names for you translate into creation stories and song maps.
Santos Perez is an indigenous Chamorro writer from Guam, and he wrote this poem for June 8th of 2016, which is World Oceans Day. The video was developed by Justin Ah Chong, a Hawaiian filmmaker, and it went on to screenings at several film festivals, winning the 2018 Silver Lay Award for the short film competition of the Honolulu Film Awards. The poem is in the form of a praise song, as evidenced by the title. It's an African poetic form, usually used in oral tradition, that composes laudatory epithets in praise of an object and is supposed to capture its essence. This object could be a man, a god, a living creature, whatever the poet desires. And in the case of Praise Song for Oceania, Santos Perez praises, Oceania. To capture the essence of Oceania, Santos Perez's poem spans over 100 lines. The ocean isn't a simple thing to capture. The poem is separated into 17 sections, and it covers a multitude of topics and aspects of the ocean. The poem starts with the physical, the ocean as water, and how water fits into the water cycle, and how we humans see the water in its physical state, how it becomes clouds and rain and rivers and lakes and ice sheets and glaciers. But this human view of the ocean must also acknowledge our human exploitation of it. This is what the next section of the poem seems to cover: the ocean's capacity to endure, survive, dilute. As in my last section of the video, humans tend to exploit the ocean and consider it as a space of commerce. What can we take from the ocean? With our trawling boats. Santos Perez uses violent imagery to describe this. The violation, pillage, scar, open wounds, and taking. And this human violence is transformed into human death. The next section of the poem discusses the ocean's capacity to bury, but also the capacity to remember. History preserves the dead, but it's also remembrance. From ruined cities to libraries, and watery graves to museums, Santos Perez captures the ocean not only in its death, but in its memorialization, in its past and its present, and yet the ocean itself is also dying. Santos Perez again drives home the effects of human exploitation, of the whales and fish that have washed ashore, the coral starved in bleach. The ocean isn't a space of death, it's a space of life as well. Not only does he mention the living creatures that live there, but he describes the ocean itself as living, using the descriptor liquid lungs choked of oxygen. The ocean itself has lungs, it is a body, and it's breathing. And while lungs may imply that the ocean is a living creature, it's also more than that. Santos Perez says, "Praise your capacity to forgive." This line is almost reminiscent of a prayer that one might offer to a deity, and so in attributing this to the ocean, it presents it as something perhaps greater than just another natural living creature. It protects, too. Santos Perez says, "Please protect our daughter when she swims in your currents." While a desire for protection from the ocean may present it as a dangerous thing, the poem ends with a message of hope. Santos Perez writes, "Praise your capacity for hope." He looks to both the present and the future. It's not just a poem of human exploitation, but of human care for the ocean as well. He mentions the nuclear-free and independent Pacific movement, the sanctuaries and no-take zones. Each line in this section of the poem begins with praise, whereas before the term praise was only used at the start of each stanza. As much as there is to mourn, there is a lot more to celebrate. In the stanza from the clip that I played at the beginning of this section, Santos Perez names the ocean in several different languages from the Pacific. Each of these languages and cultures represents a different perspective of the ocean, and yet all of these descriptors, all of these words, are looking to the same thing. While the majority of the poem is addressed to you, which is assumed to be the ocean, it ends with our. Santos Perez says, "Praise our common heritage, praise our pathway, and promise to each other." This praise song isn't just from him, an individual human, but from many people and many cultures who look to this one object, the ocean, that envelops and embodies so many different aspects. The ocean isn't just tragedy, and it isn't just hope, but both at the same time. Again, it's not just the ocean's capacity to bury, but its capacity to remember. Its capacity for birth, and its capacity to smother. The ocean isn't just one concept, it's many, and though some of them seem to contradict one another, the ocean is still what it is. As Santos Perez writes, "Praise your blue planet, one world ocean." So far, we've discussed a lot of what we do to the ocean, but what does the ocean do to us? Transcorporeality is the fluidity between bodies rather than binary opposition. In this case, fluidity between human bodies and bodies of water. Carrie Holm confronts precisely this in her short story, The Pluperfect Pawa. Pawa is a pun on the Maori word for abalone and the English word power, and the story features a married couple, the wife of which has accepted her oceanic transformation and the husband of which has not. Carrie Holm is a New Zealand writer, and this story was published in her collection Stonefish. The story itself is abstract and a little difficult to follow, blending together with little distinction multiple narrative voices and styles. In this story, multiple voices are unified to deliver one narrative, much like how the islands in the Pacific are unified as Oceania, and multiple conflicting concepts are unified to represent the ocean in praise song. The ocean actually shapes the physical form of praise song. If you look at how the lines in each stanza are arranged, they flow in and out like waves. Even the ornament used to separate each stanza takes the shape of a wave. However, it's not just the arrangement of the pluperfect Pawa that's transformed. The transformation of the human characters into the oceanic is something that's very literal. Though it's not entirely clear how the characters change, the husband considers his wife something else, something distinctly not human. The wife describes a nightmare she once had of Pawa that weren't ordinary inside. They were gray, spongy stuff, which kept oozing out everywhere like brains. As abalone don't normally have such distinct brains, this nightmare seems to be the wife projecting more human-like qualities on a non-human animal. She has an established affinity with the abalone. She'd previously described a conversation with one in which it shows off bashfully its first intragenerational mutation, and the wife offers her compliments. Humans wouldn't normally have much in common with abalone, or so it would seem. They're mollusks, or snails, and they live entirely underwater. Holm forces the reader to conceptualize an apocalyptic narrative in which humans are transformed by the oceanic, and not just their work nor land, but their bodies. Though the husband at first resists this transformation, it would seem as though the ocean gets to him as well by the end. The wife says, "Oh no, don't get serious on me, not at this stage, not on this stage." The oceanic transformation is inevitable. Oceanic embodiment has the ocean hold the globe, hold land, hold together concepts conflicting and not, and now it consumes too. The wife of the pluperfect Pawa has an aside on millennialist fiction, fiction in which we have arrived at the crucial time for humanity and doom is upon us. This genre feels apocalyptic, but the pluperfect Pawa doesn't depict the end of the world. The ocean and the abalone are still of the current, familiar world after all. Instead, the ocean, which as Mentz wrote, comprises 90% of the total biospheric volume of our planet, continues to envelop and hold everything to the point of making it all like itself. Holm writes, "Casually say to yourself these 3 sentences. 1. Everything that is interconnected. 2. Everything you can think of exists, and everything you can't think of does too. 3. You are what you eat. Now go away and sort out which one, if any, was the lie. Trick question. Probably none of that was a lie. The ocean is a body that unifies both physical land and people and conflicting concepts. Since you are what you eat, Holmes' oceanic future isn't so much an alien apocalypse as it is a prophecy. Maybe not in a literal sense. But the 3 works we've reviewed in this video, our Sea of Islands, Praise Song for Oceania, and the Pluperfect Power, all testify to the embodying nature of the ocean. People are always a part of that embodiment, and in being embodied by the ocean, perhaps we are being consumed by it. You are what you eat. The abalone and the wife of the Pluperfect Power transform together. Praise Song for Oceania acknowledges both oceanic care, protection, and human care. Our Sea of Islands argues the ocean as a space of equal value to human-populated land, rather than cartographical void. It's not just what humans do to the ocean and vice versa, but what we do with one another.